Rain drums against the windshield as Commander Sarah Williams drives home from a classified military briefing. Her hands grip the steering wheel of her unmarked government vehicle while her mind races through the upcoming SEAL team deployment details in Afghanistan. The digital clock on her dashboard glows 23:47, casting a soft blue light across her face. Exhausted from 18 hours of mission planning, she almost misses the flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Letting out a quiet sigh, she guides her car to the shoulder of the empty street, following proper protocol to the letter, just as she's trained countless junior officers to do. Officer James Miller watches the black Mercedes ease to a perfect stop, his lips curling into a familiar smirk. As he calls in the plates to dispatch, he deliberately fails to mention the government tags, focusing instead on what he sees as another opportunity to put an entitled minority in their place. Switching his bodycam to standby mode, a practiced motion he's performed countless times before he emerges from his patrol car, his flashlight beam cutting through the rain with aggressive intensity. The beam of light deliberately avoids the military ID Commander Williams holds steadily in her left hand. Instead, Miller trains it directly into her eyes, a classic intimidation tactic she's witnessed during her years of interrogation resistance training. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" His voice carries that false sweetness she recognizes from years of dealing with hostile interrogators. During SEAE training, Williams maintains her composure, her mind automatically recording every detail of the encounter, just as she does during mission debriefings. Miller claims she ran a stop sign at the intersection of Maple and Pine, a statement that makes Williams' right eyebrow raise slightly because she knows for certain there hasn't been a stop sign at that intersection for the past 3 years since it was replaced with a traffic light. Her photographic memory, essential for mission planning, recalls every detail of her drive home. Miller mistakes her slight expression for defiance, and his demeanor shifts instantly from false politeness to aggressive authority. As Williams calmly points out the factual error regarding the non-existent stop sign, Miller yanks open her car door, the action triggering silent alarms in 3 separate security systems installed in her vehicle as part of standard protocol for high-ranking military personnel carrying classified information. The sudden movement causes Williams go back to shift in her backseat, revealing the edge of her dress uniform complete with Naval Special Warfare insignia. But Miller is too focused on his planned takedown to notice this crucial detail. Unbeknownst to Miller, security cameras from the nearby Federal Reserve Building, the 24-hour pharmacy, and a newly installed smart traffic system are recording the entire encounter in high definition from multiple angles. His actions, now documented in ways he never anticipated. Williams remains perfectly still, her SEAL training kicking in as she automatically begins calculating distances, angles, and potential scenarios, her muscle memory ready for any situation while outwardly maintaining an appearance of complete compliance. Miller, sensing none of the coiled strength beneath Williams' calm exterior, begins shouting about resisting arrest, his voice echoing off the wet pavement as 3 separate recording systems capture his increasingly aggressive behavior. Williams slowly places both hands on her steering wheel. In clear view, her eyes forward as she records every word, every action, and every detail with the same precision she uses during mission reconnaissance. Back at the station, Miller's dashboard camera continues recording as he calls for backup, describing a hostile subject in a suspicious vehicle, completely unaware that he's just initiated a sequence of events that will expose years of systematic misconduct and transform the entire police department. Internal Affairs Detective Maria Rodriguez sits in stunned silence, watching the security footage for the 4th time, her experienced eyes catching every subtle movement as the screens before her display the incident from 3 synchronized angles. The coffee in her cup has long gone cold, forgotten. As she leans forward, squinting at the moment Miller reaches into his back pocket before approaching Williams' vehicle, the movement so casual it would be easy to miss, but Rodriguez has spent 15 years catching dirty cops in lies, and this movement speaks volumes. The revelation hits harder as she opens Williams' classified personnel file, the pages detailing covert operations that saved hundreds of American lives, including a particularly daring hostage rescue in Yemen that earned her the Navy Cross. Rodriguez glances at her own service photo from her time in the Marines, hanging on her office wall, and feels a deep connection to the woman Miller targeted, her hand trembling slightly as she reaches for her phone to contact Naval Intelligence for clearance to access more of Williams' record. Rodriguez switches to Miller's dashcam footage, her jaw clenching as she discovers a disturbing pattern: 17 similar stops in the past month alone, all targeting successful minorities in expensive cars. She begins building a spreadsheet tracking each incident, her screen filling with dates, times, and disturbing similarities across every case. The victims include 3 doctors, 2 judges, and a prominent civil rights attorney, each stop following the same pattern of manufactured probable cause and aggressive escalation. A knock at her office door makes her look up to see her partner, Detective James Chen, holding a tablet, his expression grim as he shows her the deleted text messages recovered from Miller's phone conversations between Miller and 6 other officers in his precinct, bragging about the targeting system complete with a points system for different types of cars and professions. The officers called it their merit badge program, awarding extra points for medical professionals and military veterans. Chen whispers that 3 rookie officers have already come forward willing to testify about the systematic harassment they witnessed. The investigation expands like ripples in a pond as Rodriguez and Chen dig deeper, discovering offshore accounts receiving mysterious deposits, each payment coinciding with stops involving wealthy victims. The evidence suggests a broader scheme of harassment and extortion involving senior officers within the department. Rodriguez remembers her own experience with discrimination during her rookie years and feels a fierce determination to expose every layer of corruption. Williams' military superiors arrive at Internal Affairs, bringing with them surveillance footage from classified military satellites that happened to capture Miller's previous stops. The technology so advanced it shows crystal clear images of Miller planting evidence in other victims' vehicles. Rodriguez watches in amazement as naval intelligence officers reveal their own parallel investigation into harassment of military personnel by local law enforcement, a pattern that led them straight to Miller and his colleagues. The final piece falls into place when Rodriguez interviews the night shift dispatcher, who reveals screenshots of deleted computer messages showing Miller and other officers coordinating their attacks, selecting targets based on vehicle registration data and social media profiles. The dispatcher hands over a thumb drive containing years of evidence, explaining through tears how she feared reporting the misconduct would cost her job, her pension, her entire future. As Rodriguez compiles her final report, the evidence becomes overwhelming. Miller hadn't just targeted Williams, he had been the ringleader of a sophisticated operation designed to humiliate and extort successful minorities. Her report details over 200 incidents spanning 5 years, involving 12 officers and resulting in millions in unauthorized payments, seized vehicles, and destroyed careers. The scope of the conspiracy sending shockwaves through the department as more officers come forward, their testimonies painting a picture of systematic racism and corruption that went far beyond simple traffic stops. The investigation culminates as Rodriguez presents her findings to the district attorney, the thick file containing irrefutable evidence of criminal conspiracy, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. The DA studies the satellite footage, enhanced bodycam videos, recovered text messages, and financial records, her expression hardening as she realizes the case represents an opportunity to address decades of institutional racism within the department. Rodriguez leaves the meeting knowing that Miller's traffic stop of Commander Williams has unknowingly exposed a cancer within law enforcement that could finally be cut out. The district attorney's office buzzes with unprecedented energy as District Attorney Sharon Martinez reads the final charging document, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose, while her team of prosecutors stands around her desk in anxious anticipation. The charges against Officer James Miller fill 27 pages, including multiple counts of civil rights violations, criminal conspiracy evidence, tampering, extortion, and false imprisonment, the weight of each charge building like thunder clouds before a storm. News vans cluster outside the courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees, while reporters clutch coffee cups in the early morning chill, waiting for the official announcement. Williams' commanding officer, Captain Marcus Thompson, storms through the precinct, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as desk sergeants and officers scramble to attention the classified folder in his hands containing evidence so damaging it could reshape the entire department. The police chief visibly pales as Thompson slaps the folder onto his desk, revealing satellite photos showing Miller and his crew planning their targeting operations behind an abandoned warehouse. Miller paces in his holding cell, 6 steps forward, 6 steps back, his polished shoes scuffing against the concrete floor as his phone in the evidence locker continues to explode with panicked messages from other officers worried their own misconduct might surface, the fear spreading through the department like wildfire as more officers realize their text messages, emails, and dashcam footage are being scrutinized. Rodriguez watches through the observation window, noting every nervous tick, every frustrated gesture, building a psychological profile that will help the prosecution. The police union representative, Attorney George Webster, sits in his office reviewing the evidence file, his hands trembling as he reaches for his fourth cup of coffee, the scope of corruption far exceeding anything he encountered in 20 years of defending officers, his ethical boundaries finally reaching their breaking point as he discovers footage of Miller bragging about targeting a pregnant doctor rushing to deliver a baby. Webster stands abruptly, gathering his briefcase, and quote his decision to withdraw from the case, sending shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Captain Thompson meets with the FBI task force in a secure conference room, 3 floors below ground level, their voices hushed as they discuss the national security implications of targeting military personnel. Satellite footage plays on the wall showing Miller conducting unauthorized surveillance of the naval base, his activities potentially compromising classified operations across 3 states. The FBI agents exchange worried glances as they realize the depth of the security breach. Martinez calls an emergency meeting with her top prosecutors, the conference room growing quiet as she outlines the broadening scope of charges. Evidence from internal affairs revealing Miller and his associates had created a detailed database of potential targets, including judges, lawyers, doctors, and military officers. The prosecution team realizes they aren't just trying a corrupt cop, they're exposing a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating under the cover of law enforcement. Williams sits in her office at the Naval Special Warfare Command, reviewing the charging documents, her tactical mind analyzing each count like mission parameters, while surveillance footage plays on multiple screens, showing similar incidents across different jurisdictions. Her team of military lawyers working alongside civilian prosecutors to build an airtight case that will expose decades of systematic discrimination and abuse of power. The charging document becomes public, sending tremors through law enforcement agencies nationwide as other departments scramble to review their own traffic stop patterns. Internal affairs divisions across the country suddenly flooded with similar complaints. Miller watches from his cell as his carefully constructed world crumbles, the media coverage spreading to national networks as journalists uncover connections between his targeting system and similar patterns in other cities. Back in the district attorney's office, Martinez adds a final charge to the document: conspiracy against rights under color of law, carrying a potential life sentence, her signature flowing across the bottom of the page as Captain Thompson provides one last piece of evidence, a recording from a military-grade surveillance device showing Miller accepting payments from a towing company for targeting specific vehicles. Webster officially files his withdrawal from the case, leaving Miller to face the mounting charges with only an overwhelmed public defender, the scales of justice finally beginning to balance as the full weight of the law turns against those who abused it. The marble halls of the federal courthouse echo with footsteps as Commander Williams enters for the preliminary hearing, her measured stride reflecting years of military discipline. Heads turn as she passes, wearing her dress whites, the rows of ribbons and medals telling a story of valor. that makes the gathering journalists fall silent. Even the usual courthouse chatter dies down as she takes her seat in the front row beside Captain Thompson, her face a mask of calm determination, while across the aisle Miller shifts uncomfortably in his orange jumpsuit. Public defender Sarah Chen whispers frantically to Miller about considering a plea deal, her legal pad covered with notes detailing the mountains of evidence against him. Security footage from a local coffee shop plays on her laptop showing Miller and three other officers plotting to discredit Williams, the timestamp revealing the meeting occurred just hours before they attempted to stage a drug bust at her residence, their plan spectacularly backfiring when they discovered her home was a secure military facility with round-the-clock monitoring and motion sensor cameras. Detective Rodriguez presents new evidence to the prosecution team: surveillance footage from an ATM capturing Miller accepting an envelope from a local business owner who later reveals a protection racket targeting minority-owned businesses. The business owner, now turned state's witness, describes how Miller and his associates would plant evidence during traffic stops, then offer to make the charges disappear in exchange for regular payments. The prosecutor adds conspiracy and racketeering charges to the already lengthy list. Social media explodes as an anonymous source leaks decades worth of bodycam footage showing Miller and his team high-fiving after successful targeting operations, celebrating the tears of their victims, and bragging about their court system. News channels run split-screen comparisons showing Williams leading combat missions while Miller harassed innocent civilians, the public outrage growing as more victims come forward with similar stories of abuse and intimidation. Captain Thompson meets with military intelligence analysts in a secure room 3 levels below the courthouse, their computers processing years of satellite data, revealing how Miller and his accomplices used police resources to build detailed profiles of potential victims, the evidence suggesting a level of organization that transforms the case from simple corruption to organized crime. Military lawyers argue for additional charges related to compromising national security as the satellite footage shows Miller surveilling military personnel during classified operations. Williams' legal team, led by former JAD officer Colonel Maria Hernandez, methodically prepares their case in a war room covered with timeline charts and evidence photos. Their approach, focusing on the systematic nature of Miller's crimes rather than any single incident. Hernandez brings in expert witnesses, including statisticians who analyze decades of traffic stop data revealing patterns of discrimination so clear they could only be intentional, their findings spreading through law enforcement agencies nationwide, triggering internal investigations in dozens of departments. The prosecution receives an unexpected breakthrough when Miller's former partner, Officer Kevin Roberts, requests a meeting, his conscience finally breaking under the weight of guilt. Roberts reveals recordings from his personal phone documenting years of misconduct, including Miller coaching rookie officers on how to target specific demographics without leaving evidence. Assistant District Attorney James Wong realizes these recordings provide the final piece needed to demonstrate the systematic nature of the corruption. In the courthouse holding cell, Miller watches as his world continues to crumble, his new public defender struggling to find any defense against the overwhelming evidence. Chen explains that every potential character witness has withdrawn their support, former colleagues now scrambling to make deals with the prosecution. Miller stares at his reflection in the holding cell window, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his actions as Chen presents the prosecution's latest plea offer: 25 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony against other corrupt officers. Outside the courthouse, community tensions rise as protesters gather holding signs demanding justice, their numbers growing daily. As more evidence becomes public, Williams continues her military duties. Between court appearances, her commanding presence, a stark contrast to Miller's deteriorating demeanor. Local police departments begin implementing emergency reforms as similar cases surface in other cities, the ripple effects of the case spreading across the nation like waves in a pond. The final pretrial hearing approaches as both sides prepare for what promises to be a landmark case in civil rights law. Judge Gloria Martinez reviews the evidence in her chambers, her expression grave, as she realizes this case could fundamentally change law enforcement practices Nationwide television crews set up their equipment outside the courthouse, preparing to broadcast every moment of what the media has dubbed the trial of the decade. Thunder crashes outside the federal courthouse as Assistant District Attorney James Wong rises from his chair, the packed courtroom falling into absolute silence, every eye following his movement as he approaches the jury, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Behind him, Commander Williams sits in her dress, whites her ribbons and medals, catching the light from the storm flashing through the tall windows, while across the aisle Miller seems to shrink in his chair, his once proud demeanor crumbling under the weight of the evidence about to be presented. Wong begins his opening statement with a simple security camera image showing Williams pulling a wounded Marine from a burning building during a classified operation in Afghanistan, the projection screen highlighting her dedication to service while simultaneously displaying a second image of Miller harassing an elderly black doctor at a traffic stop. The stark contrast drawing quiet gasps from the jury. Wong methodically outlines the prosecution's case, his voice steady as he details 17 years of systematic abuse, explaining how Miller built an empire of corruption beneath the badge. The prosecutor reveals a massive digital presentation displaying thousands of traffic stops organized by race, profession, and vehicle type, the data forming unmistakable patterns that statistical experts will prove could not have occurred by chance. Next, he plays a series of dashcam videos showing Miller and his associates celebrating after particularly devastating stops, their cruel laughter echoing through the courtroom as they mock their victims, the jurors' faces reflecting growing disgust as the evidence mounts. Wong promises to prove not just individual acts of misconduct, but a calculated conspiracy designed to target and destroy successful minorities. Defense attorney Sarah Chen rises for her opening statement, her hands trembling slightly as she attempts to paint Miller as a dedicated officer working in high-crime areas, her argument faltering as Wong objects, presenting immediate evidence that the targeted stops occurred in affluent neighborhoods far from any crime hotspots. Chen struggles to explain Miller's actions as reasonable police work, where the prosecution silently displays his text messages bragging about destroying successful minorities' careers on the screen behind her. The jury leans forward as Wong introduces his witness list, including military commanders, federal agents, and statistical experts who will demonstrate the mathematical impossibility of Miller's stop pattern occurring without deliberate targeting. Meanwhile, Williams maintains perfect composure, her military bearing a sharp contrast to Miller's increasingly agitated state. Chen attempts to suggest that Williams' military training made her intimidating to officers, but her argument collapses as Wong displays footage of Williams teaching conflict de-escalation to police academies. Thunder booms again as Wong reveals his key piece of evidence, satellite footage showing Miller and his team planning their targeting operations behind an abandoned warehouse, the high-resolution images clearly showing them dividing up territories and selecting victims based on vehicle registration data. Chen objects frantically, but Judge Martinez overrules her. Assistant District Attorney Wong approaches the evidence table with measured steps, lifting a sealed evidence bag containing Miller's own dashcam footage. The courtroom holds its breath as he loads the video showing the night of Williams' stop, the high-definition recording revealing every detail of Miller's aggressive approach, the camera's timestamp matching perfectly with footage from 3 different security cameras. Wong methodically builds his case, demonstrating how Miller deliberately ignored Williams' military ID while fabricating probable cause. Detective Rodriguez takes the stand, her testimony painting a devastating picture of systematic corruption. She presents a digital map showing hundreds of targeting incidents, each one color-coded by victim profession: red dots for doctors, blue for lawyers, green for military personnel. The pattern so clear it draws audible reactions from the jury. Miller shifts uncomfortably as Rodriguez reveals how her investigation uncovered offshore accounts tracking deposits that coincided precisely with traffic stops involving wealthy minorities. The prosecution calls Dr. Marcus Chen, chief of cardiac surgery, whose testimony recounts how Miller detained him for 2 hours while he desperately tried to reach the hospital for an emergency transplant surgery. The patient's family sitting in the gallery, their presence A stark reminder of the human cost of Miller's actions, security footage shows Miller laughing with his partners as Chen begged to be released. Wong presents hospital records showing the patient barely survived due to the delay. Military intelligence analyst Captain Sarah Foster approaches the stand her security clearance, allowing her to present classified satellite footage showing Miller conducting unauthorized surveillance of military personnel. The image is crystal clear as they reveal his team tracking service members' vehicles and planning strategic stops. Wang introduces evidence proving Miller specifically targeted decorated veterans, the jury watching in shock. As the scope of his operation becomes clear, Williams' former commanding officer, Captain Thompson, testifies about her extraordinary service record, describing classified missions, now declassified specifically for this trial. The courtroom falls silent as he recounts how Williams led a team that rescued 37 hostages from terrorists while sustaining gunshot wounds herself, the testimony serving to highlight the stark contrast between her service and Miller's abuse of power. Photos of her combat medals appear on screen, while Miller seems to physically shrink in his chair. The prosecution presents forensic accountant Dorlisa Wong, no relation to the ADA, who methodically outlines the complex financial web Miller created. Her analysis revealing over $2 billion in unexplained deposits to offshore accounts tied to traffic stops. She demonstrates how Miller and his associates used a sophisticated coding system to track payments from victims who paid to avoid falsified charges, the evidence showing years of systematic extortion. A series of rookie officers take the stand, having turned state's evidence. They describe Miller's training program, teaching them how to target successful minorities without leaving evidence. Their testimony revealing how he instructed them to disable body cameras during crucial moments. Wong plays audio recordings of Miller bragging about destroying successful minority carriers, the officers' testimonies corroborating every detail. The prosecution saves their strongest witness for last. Commander Williams herself takes the stand, her commanding presence drawing every eye in the courtroom as she calmly recounts not only her own experience but patterns of similar harassment she observed throughout her military career. She presents data collected by military intelligence showing how Miller's targeting of service members potentially compromised national security operations. Wong displays security footage from the night of Williams' stop showing multiple angles of Miller planting evidence in her vehicle, the high-resolution images leaving no room for doubt. Technical experts testify about the authenticity of the footage, confirming no tampering or editing occurred. Miller watches helplessly as his lawyer frantically scribbles notes, knowing each piece of evidence drives another nail into his defense. The prosecution concludes with a powerful presentation combining odd elements, financial records, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and satellite data into a comprehensive timeline showing the evolution of Miller's criminal enterprise. Wong demonstrates how simple traffic stops grew into a sophisticated operation targeting successful minorities across multiple jurisdictions, the evidence revealing a level of organization that transforms the case from mere corruption into organized crime under color of law. As Wong rests the prosecution's case, the courtroom remains silent, processing the overwhelming evidence. Judge Martinez calls for a recess, but few people move, still absorbing the magnitude of corruption revealed. Miller sits motionless, his face pale, as he realizes the full weight of evidence against him, while Williams maintains her stoic composure, her military bearing unbroken as the prosecution concludes its systematic dismantling of Miller's criminal empire. Public defender Sarah Chen rises to present the defense's case, her shoulders tense with the impossible task ahead of her. Miller takes the stand, his once confident swagger replaced by nervous fidgeting as he attempts to justify his actions, claiming he felt threatened by Williams' military training and build. Chen guides him through prepared testimony about working dangerous streets in high-crime areas, but her strategy crumbles as Assistant De Wong stands with a stack of precinct maps showing all targeted stops occurred in affluent neighborhoods. Miller struggles to explain why he approached a supposedly threatening subject alone without backup, his voice cracking as Wong presents bodycam footage showing him joking with his partner about targeting successful minorities, moments Before Williams stopped, the jury watches intently as Miller contradicts his own previous statements, Wong methodically highlighting each inconsistency with documented evidence, timestamps, and GPS data proving Miller had deliberately planned the encounter. The defense calls Officer Brian Reynolds, Miller's former partner, to testify about standard department procedures, but Reynolds breaks ranks under cross-examination, revealing the elaborate pointing system Miller created, assigning different values to different professions. Military officers were worth extra points, he explains, his voice heavy with shame as he describes how they celebrated particularly devastating stops with expensive dinners paid for from their extortion funds. Chen watches helplessly as her own witness destroys her case. Attempting to salvage their defense, Chen presents statistics about crime rates in the city, but Wong immediately counters with detailed analysis showing how Miller's targets were predominantly successful professionals with no criminal records. Expert witness Data Maria Santos, a criminologist, demonstrates through advanced statistical modeling that the probability of Miller's stop pattern occurring randomly was less than 1 in 10 million. Her testimony devastating any claim of legitimate police work. Miller grows increasingly agitated on the stand as Wong presents evidence of his offshore accounts, his attempted explanations about legitimate investments falling apart as forensic accountants detail how each deposit matched exactly with documented traffics. Stops. The jury appears visibly disturbed as Wong reveals spreadsheets showing how Miller tracked his victims' net worth to determine extortion amounts. The defense attempts to call character witnesses, but each potential supporter withdraws after seeing the mounting evidence. Miller's former supervisor, Captain James Peterson, initially agreed to testify about his work record, but instead reveals years of buried complaints about racial profiling that were hidden by sympathetic superiors. Peterson admits to helping cover up misconduct in exchange for a percentage of the extortion payments, his testimony exposing the depth of departmental corruption. Chen desperately tries to paint Williams as aggressive during the stop, but courthouse security footage shows Williams maintaining perfect military bearing. While Miller escalates the situation, Wong presents Williams' extensive conflict resolution training records, including lectures she gave at the FBI Academy about de-escalation techniques, the contrast between her professional conduct and Miller's aggression becoming starkly clear. As the case continues to unravel, Miller becomes visibly distressed, his carefully constructed lies collapsing under the weight of evidence. He accidentally reveals information about other corrupt officers during cross-examination, Wong seizing on each slip to demonstrate the broader conspiracy. Chen attempts damage control, but Miller ignores her signals, continuing to incriminate himself and others in what observers describe as a complete meltdown on the stand. The defense calls Dr. Robert Freeman, a police psychology expert, to testify about officers' stress in dangerous situations, but his testimony backfires when Wong presents Miller's psychiatric evaluations showing patterns of racial bias and power abuse. Freeman is forced to admit that Miller's behavior indicates predatory targeting rather than legitimate fear for officers' safety, his professional assessment supporting the prosecution's case. In a final desperate move, Chen attempts to argue that Williams' military training made her inherently dangerous. Wong responds by playing video of Williams teaching community outreach programs, showing her working with local youth and training police officers in ethical conduct. The jury watches footage of her receiving humanitarian awards, while Miller sat in his patrol car plotting to destroy careers. As the defense concludes its disastrous presentation, Miller sits with his head in his hands, the weight of his actions finally seeming to hit him. Chen gathers her papers, avoiding eye contact with her client, while Wong prepares his closing arguments. The gallery buzzes with whispered conversations about the stunning collapse of the defense and the broader implications for law enforcement reform. Judge Martinez calls for a brief recess, her expression grave as she considers the overwhelming evidence of corruption presented during the trial. Lightning flashes through the courthouse windows as Assistant District Attorney Wong rises for his closing argument, the packed courtroom leaning forward in anticipation. He begins not with Miller's crimes, but with a video of Commander Williams leading a rescue operation in Afghanistan. the footage showing her carrying a wounded colleague through gunfire while coordinating her team, the stark contrast between her service and Miller's betrayal of his badge, setting the tone for his final presentation. Wong methodically reconstructs Miller's criminal enterprise using a massive digital display that tracks every documented abuse of power, 17 years of targeting successful minorities, represented by glowing points on a city map, each point expanding to show victim statements, financial records, and surveillance footage, the visualization revealing patterns so obvious that several jurors shake their heads in visible disgust, while Miller stares at the floor, unable to watch his crimes displayed in such devastating detail. The prosecution presents a final piece of evidence, previously sealed for national security reasons, satellite footage showing Miller conducting surveillance of military personnel during classified operations. Wong explains how Miller's targeting of service members potentially compromised missions, endangering American lives, the evidence transforming what began as a civil rights violation into a matter of national security. Captain Thompson nods gravely from the gallery as Wong details the broader implications of Miller's actions. Moving through the financial evidence, Wong displays a complex web of offshore accounts, spreadsheets tracking victim payments, and recordings of Miller instructing his team how to maximize profits from their targeting operation. The systematic nature of the corruption, detailed in charts and graphs that demonstrate the mathematical impossibility of these stops being random police work. Forensic accountants' testimony scrolls across the screen showing millions in unexplained deposits, perfectly timed with documented traffic stops. Wong turns to address the human cost, calling attention to the victims seated in the gallery: doctors, lawyers, military officers, and other professionals whose lives Miller attempted to destroy. He plays a heartbreaking montage of victim impact statements, including the family of a patient who nearly died when Miller detained their surgeon, the powerful testimony drawing quiet sobs from several jurors, while Williams maintains her stoic military, bearing her presence, a reminder of the strength required to stand up to systematic abuse. Public Defender Chen rises for her closing argument, her voice lacking conviction, as she attempts to paint Miller as a dedicated officer who lost his way, but Wong immediately counters with Miller's old recordings, bragging about destroying successful minorities' careers, the evidence so overwhelming that Chen struggles to maintain eye contact with the jury, her arguments falling flat against the mountain of proof showing deliberate targeting, systematic abuse, and calculated corruption. The prosecution concludes by returning to the night of Williams' stop, showing synchronized footage from multiple angles that leave no doubt about Miller's actions. Wong methodically demonstrates how this single incident exposed a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of law enforcement, his voice rising with controlled passion as he demands justice not just for Williams but for every victim of Miller's targeting operation. Wong displays final statistics revealing the true scope of Miller's operation: over 200 documented incidents of targeting successful minorities, millions in extorted payments, dozens of careers disrupted, and lives forever changed. The evidence painting a picture of corruption so vast it sends shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Chen offers a brief rebuttal, but her words seem hollow against the weight of evidence, her own witnesses having betrayed her case. The prosecution ends with a powerful split-screen presentation. On one side, Williams leading combat missions, saving lives and serving her country; on the other, Miller orchestrating his targeting operation, destroying lives and betraying his oath. The contrast so stark that even Miller's former supporters in the gallery look away. Wong concludes by reminding the jury that this case represents more than one officer's corruption. It stands as a testament to the courage required to expose systematic abuse and the importance of holding those who abuse power accountable. As Wong takes his seat, a heavy silence falls over the courtroom, the weight of evidence pressing down on every person present. Judge Martinez calls for the jury to begin deliberations, but the outcome seems inevitable. Miller sits defeated, his shoulders slumped as the full impact of his exposed crimes settles over him, while Williams maintains her commanding presence, her military bearing unbroken by the years of systematic abuse she helped expose. The jury files back into the courtroom. After just 47 minutes of deliberation, Their swift return sending ripples of anticipation through the gathered crowd. Commander Williams sits perfectly straight in her dress whites, while Miller seems to shrink further into himself as the jury forewoman rises holding the verdict form, her hand steady as she prepares to read. The court's clerk calls for silence, but the room is already holding its collective breath. Guilty on all counts, the words echo through the courthouse like thunder. Miller found guilty of civil rights violations, criminal conspiracy, evidence tampering, extortion, false imprisonment, and dozens of other charges. The forewoman reading each verdict with clear conviction. Several jurors glance toward Williams, their expressions showing profound respect, while others glare at Miller, unable to hide their disgust at his systematic abuse of power. Judge Gloria Martinez leans forward for sentencing, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. As she addresses Miller directly, she speaks of the sacred trust placed in law enforcement and the devastating impact of betraying that trust, describing his actions as among the most egregious abuses of power she has encountered in 30 years. As a judge, Martinez sentences Miller to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release, orders him to pay millions in restitution, and permanently strips him of his law enforcement certification. The impact of the verdict spreads like shockwaves through law enforcement agencies. Nationwide, police departments scramble to implement new oversight measures and reform their traffic stop procedures. Major cities launch investigations into targeting patterns, leading to dozens of officers being suspended pending review. Williams' case becomes required teaching material at police academies across the country, her story serving as both a warning and an inspiration. Commander Williams establishes the Justice in Service Foundation, using her now public platform to combat discrimination against military personnel and minorities nationwide. The organization quickly grows into a powerful force for police reform, working directly with law enforcement agencies to implement new training protocols and oversight systems, her military expertise bringing credibility and structure to the reform movement. Miller writes a comprehensive confession from prison, documenting 2 decades of systematic abuse, his testimony leading to investigations of corrupt officers in departments across the country. The document becomes a crucial tool for understanding how discrimination can become institutionalized within law enforcement. Miller expresses profound remorse as he realizes the full scope of damage he caused to countless lives. The case triggers a congressional investigation into discriminatory practices in law enforcement. Williams testifies before the Senate, her commanding presence and detailed testimony leading to the passage of the Law Enforcement Accountability and Professional Standards Act, requiring body cameras, enhanced oversight, and mandatory bias training for all police officers, her influence reshaping police culture from the ground up.